Her stepfather grabbed her by the hair and shoved her to the ground. Emily Grace was only 22. Her beauty felt more like a curse than a blessing. Jack Turner, her mother's second husband, was a man rotten to the bone. He had lost everything to liquor and gambling. By noon that day, debt collectors were already waiting outside the shack. Jack dragged Emily out into the burning daylight. His eyes were red with rage and humiliation. "Serve them," he barked. Emily froze in terror. She could not believe what she had just heard. Her own stepfather was ordering her to give herself to the men who came to collect his debts. She shook her head. Her voice cracked. "No, I will not." That refusal lit a fuse inside Jack. The men laughed. Jack's pride shattered like glass. He threw the bottle he was holding against the wall. Shards scattered. He stomped toward Emily and slapped her so hard she fell against the wooden floor. Emily tried to crawl away. Jack kicked her ribs. She gasped for air. The men stood by, smirking at her pain. Jack's drunken fury grew hotter with every second. "You defy me," he growled. He dragged her by the arm out of the shack and into the sunlit yard. Emily's dress was already torn from the struggle. Her face bore red welts. Her arms were bruised purple. She cried out, begging for mercy, but Jack had none left to give. The debt collectors followed behind, jeering. Jack shoved Emily toward the river bank near the ranch fields. The midday sun glared down on her pale skin, making every wound look raw. Emily sobbed. Her legs trembled. She tried to plead again. "Please, I am begging you." Jack gritted his teeth. Her words only deepened his shame. In one motion, he lifted her by the waist and hurled her into the water. The river splashed violently around her body. Emily sank beneath the surface, lungs filling with icy water. She clawed at the air, desperate for life. The current pressed her down. Her torn dress wrapped around her limbs like chains. She fought, but her strength was failing fast. The voices of the men faded into muffled echoes above the water. Her heart pounded. Her vision blurred. Was this the end? Was she doomed to die as nothing more than her stepfather's victim? Just as the darkness closed in, a shadow appeared on the riverbank. A horse snorted. Boots hit the ground. A man was rushing toward the water. He did not hesitate. He plunged into the river and grabbed her arm. Emily's body was limp, but her eyes still flickered with the will to live. The man pulled her to the shore, laying her down gently on the grass. Her chest heaved as she coughed up water. Her skin was covered in bruises and cuts, and her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but had no words left. The man looked down at her in shock. This was Thomas Carter, a rancher in his late 50s. His eyes widened as he saw the full horror etched across Emily's fragile frame. What kind of monster would do this to his own daughter? And what kind of fate awaited her now that her stepfather and his creditors still prowled nearby? Would Thomas be able to protect her from the storm that was only just beginning? Emily coughed and gasped as Thomas lifted her into his arms. Her body was trembling from the cold water. Her torn dress clung to her skin. He did not waste a second. He placed her on his horse and rode fast toward his ranch. The old wooden house came into view. Thomas carried her inside and laid her gently on a bed near the fireplace. He wrapped her in a thick blanket but saw her shiver. She was burning with fever. Her lips quivered as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Thomas shook his head with worry. He reached for a shirt from his chest. It was one of his old work shirts, faded but clean. He handed it to her. "You need this more than I do." Emily hesitated but slipped into the shirt. It was far too big. The sleeves covered her hands, but for the first time in years she felt a small trace of safety. She pulled the fabric close around her. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Thomas sat beside her, waiting. Emily stared at the flames with empty eyes, then tears rolled down her cheeks. She began to whisper. It was not the first time. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "For years he beat me. For years I prayed he would stop." Thomas clenched his fists, but stayed quiet. Emily wiped her face with the sleeve of his shirt. "And today, he wanted me to serve his debt collectors." She stopped and looked at Thomas with shame. "I said no. I fought back. That is when he beat me harder than ever. And then he threw me into the river like trash." Her words hung heavy in the air. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. The image of her stepfather forcing her into that horror made his stomach turn. But Emily was not finished. "There were times I thought I deserved it. Maybe I was cursed. Maybe my life had no meaning. Her voice broke again. But when you pulled me out, I felt like maybe God had not forgotten me. Thomas leaned closer. His rough hand rested gently on hers. You did not deserve a single bit of it. Not one. The warmth in his tone made her cry even harder. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she was not alone. But outside the ranch, the world was still turning, and men like Jack Turner did not forget so easily. So what would happen when he came back to take her away again? The morning sun rose over the ranch. Emily sat by the window, wrapped in Thomas's shirt, staring out at the fields. For the first time in years, she felt safe, but the safety was fragile, like glass that could shatter at any second. Thomas brought her a cup of warm tea. She thanked him with a soft smile, but her eyes still carried a storm. Then the sound of hooves broke the calm. A dark figure appeared at the gate. Jack Turner? He rode his tired horse right up to the yard and swung down with the swagger of a man who thought he owned the world. "Where is she?" he barked. Emily froze, her face pale. Thomas stepped out of the doorway, tall and steady. "She's not yours anymore," Jack laughed, a hollow laugh that stank of whiskey even from a distance. "You think you can keep her from me? She is mine. She always will be." Emily shook her head from inside the house. "No, not anymore." Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it too. Thomas crossed his arms. "You best ride on before I lose my patience." For a moment, Jack looked like he might charge, but even in his drunken state, he knew Thomas was not a man to be trifled with. He spat on the dirt, cursed under his breath, and climbed back on his horse. As he rode away, Thomas turned to Emily. "This is not over. He will come again. And worse, he will bring others." Emily's hands gripped the sleeves of the shirt tighter. "What can we do?" Thomas thought for a long moment. Then he said, "There is one man who can help. Sheriff Hawkins." Later that day, Thomas saddled up and rode into town. The sheriff was an older man with a sharp gaze, a man who had seen the worst of the frontier and still carried himself with honor. Thomas told him everything about the abuse, about the debt, about how Emily was nearly drowned in the river. The sheriff listened in silence and then nodded. "Bring her under my protection. If Jack Turner shows his face again, he'll answer to the law." Thomas returned to the ranch with a bit of hope in his chest, but he also knew one thing. Men like Jack did not give up easy. They always came back, and when they did, there would be a reckoning. Before we step into that storm, let me pause just a moment. If you have been drawn into Emily's struggle and Thomas's courage, now is the time to subscribe so you do not miss the next part of their fight, because what comes next will test them both in ways they never imagined. Night was falling over the ranch. Emily sat near the fire, her hands wrapped tight around a cup of tea. Thomas paced the floor, restless. He knew Jack Turner would not give up. He had seen the look in that man's eyes, the look of a gambler who had lost everything and wanted revenge. Suddenly, the sound of hooves shattered the silence. Dogs barked outside. Emily's cup slipped from her hands and clattered on the floor. Thomas grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. Torches lit up the night. A dozen men stood in the yard. At the front was Jack Turner with his crooked smile. Beside him was the debt collector, a tall man with a scar across his cheek. Behind them were armed thugs ready for trouble. Jack pointed toward the house. "Bring her out, now!" Thomas planted his boots firmly in the dirt. "You are not taking her." The scar-faced man sneered. "Old man, you cannot fight us all." With that, the gang rushed forward. Thomas fired a shot into the air. The blast echoed through the valley. For a second they hesitated, but then the crowd surged. Thomas swung his rifle like a club, knocking one man down. Another charged at him with a knife. They clashed hard, fists and boots in the dirt. Emily screamed from the doorway. Two men grabbed her by the arms and tried to drag her away. She fought like a wildcat, scratching and kicking, but they struck her across the face. Thomas broke free and lunged toward her, but three men jumped on his back. He struggled, throwing punches, but the weight was too much. They slammed him to the ground. Blood streamed from his brow. Jack stood over him, laughing. "You are finished, Carter." "You should have stayed out of this," Emily cried out. "Leave him alone." She tried to run to Thomas, but was shoved back down into the dirt. Jack raised his boot as if to stomp Thomas's chest. The scar-faced collector pulled Emily's hair back, snarling in her face. Everything seemed lost. And then, from the distance, came the thunder of more hooves. Voices shouted through the night. "Sheriff Hawkins, put down your weapons!" Lanterns swung as a group of riders surrounded the yard. The sheriff sat tall in his saddle, revolver steady in his hand. His deputies fanned out, rifles pointed at Jack's gang. For the first time that night, Jack's grin faded. The tables had turned. But would the sheriff arrive in time to save Emily and Thomas from the final blow? The yard froze in silence. Sheriff Hawkins sat tall on his horse, revolver steady, his voice sharp. "Drop your weapons, now." The gang hesitated. One of the deputies fired a warning shot into the air. That was enough. Knives clattered to the ground, guns were tossed aside. The men backed away, hands raised. Jack Turner's face twisted with rage and fear. For years he had ruled Emily with terror. Now he was powerless, cornered by the law and exposed for what he was. The sheriff nodded to his men. "Take them in." Within minutes, Jack and the debt collector were bound in ropes, shoved onto their horses, and led away toward town. The torches faded into the distance. All that remained was the quiet crackle of the fire and the heavy breathing of Thomas and Emily. Thomas struggled to his feet, wiping the blood from his brow. Emily ran to him, throwing her arms around his chest. For the first time, she felt safe not only in body but in spirit. Tears poured down her face, but this time they were tears of release. Thomas held her close. "It is over now. He will never hurt you again." She buried her face against him. In that moment, the years of pain began to lose their hold. The sheriff tipped his hat. "You two have been through enough. Rest easy. Justice will do the rest." Then he rode off into the night, leaving the ranch in peace once more. The dawn broke soft and golden the next morning. Emily stood on the porch, still in Thomas's old shirt, looking out across the wide fields. The horizon stretched far and free, like a promise of new life. Thomas stepped beside her, his weathered hand brushing hers. Their eyes met, not as rescuer and victim, but as two souls finding hope in the ashes of suffering. What lesson do we carry from their story? That even in the darkest valley, a hand can reach down to pull us back into the light. That no matter how broken the past, there can still be a future filled with strength and love. So let me ask you, what would you do if you saw someone like Emily, broken but still fighting to live? Would you walk away? Or would you be the one to pull him from the river? If this story moved you, give this video a like, and make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next journey we share together. Because in the Wild West and in life itself, the battles never end, but neither does hope.